My name is Barnett. I'm the editor of Publicola. I would say the mission of Publicola is to be first and foremost, a factual news source, but with a bias towards, I would say, empathy and compassion, and to cover stories that are undercovered in communities that are underserved by mainstream media. I have always wanted to be a journalist since I was, 5 years old. Never really thought of another career, and so I think I was motivated by a sense of justice and wanting the world to be fair. It's that sort of bias for empathy and for trying to talk to people who don't get asked questions in ordinary media coverage that we really put a priority on. I have some lived experience with housing instability and addiction in particular. So when I talk about empathy, part of that is I literally have empathy with people who are struggling with addiction. Listening to people's stories in a way that isn't taking the perspective of power, first and foremost. So I don't assume that somebody, has to justify themselves, against, as a drug user, let's say, against policies that, are very punitive to drug users. I think in the landscape that we have now, it's really important to have those voices that are representing the underrepresented. I think coverage of local politics in particular has really been reduced, and I think it's one of the most important areas of coverage that, I think just gets diminished as local news outlets cut staff and cut coverage areas. Everybody is aware of, probably who their senator is. I don't think people are aware of who their city council member is, what kind of decisions are being made on the local level. I think it's incredibly important, and it's the one thing that people really can influence, both journalists and members of the public at large. And so I think local news coverage is just absolutely critical. I think particularly now, I've been in Seattle for a long time, I've been in the media for longer, and have watched sort of a lot of independent media sources fall away. I think that if we were to lose outlets like Publicola, like Real Change, those perspectives really will get lost. I think it's incredibly important to get perspectives that are not from the mainstream outlets. One story that I think has been particularly impactful and that would not have been covered, and it is the kind of story that I'm talking about that Real Change covers and that we cover, is the story of Janavi Kandula, a young woman, 23 years old, who was killed by a speeding police officer in South Lake Union. And Publicola, I have just doggedly covered this story and dug up records. I was the first to report that the officer was driving 74 miles an hour, which is something that I think the police department initially tried to suppress. And I think that having that perspective of not taking it from the officer's perspective, which I think a lot of mainstream outlets really do. They're like, what was the officer experiencing? How can we exonerate this person before we even know any information? I took this perspective of the pedestrian who's just trying to cross the street, a young student immigrant from India, and wanted to know what was happening from her perspective and what was it like in those final moments of her life. Don't talk over people when you're interviewing them. You want to seem smart and you want to seem like you are getting it and following along, but the best way to do that is to listen. So be willing to sit in the silence when you're interviewing somebody, because sometimes the best answers come after that silence.